Here is the course about plasma membrane, which is the part of cell biology. In the overview of this course, we learn about what is plasma membrane. So it's the external boundary of cell membrane and how the membrane is make. So in the overview, we see that the plasma membrane made up of some protein and lipid bilayer, which is called the fluid mosaic model proposed by Sangers and Nicholson in 1972. So they showed the fluid mosaic model of plasma membrane, which is dynamic fluid structure of external boundary of cell. So we are going to learn about the plasma membrane's lipid bilayer. As you all know that plasma membrane made up of proteins and lipid bilayer. So we going to learn about the structure of lipid bilayer. Lipid bilayer. So which kind of component is present in a lipid bilayer, how it's going to attach and how it's going to form the bilayer of lipids, and how the protein are integrated in the lipid bilayer, and what is function of lipid bilayer in the plasma membrane. So let's move about the lipid bilayer structure, how it's look and how it's made. So here is the lipid bilayer. In the figure you can see the extracellular and intracellular. Between the extracellular and intracellular plasma membrane is formed by two layers of lipid, the upper leaflet and lower leaflet, made up of phospholipid bilayer. So it's having phosphate and lipid combination. You can understand from the name of lipid bilayer. It's called phospholipid bilayer. So it's made up of some phosphate or lipid. Now you can see here is the head and tail of the lipid bilayer. So the head is hydrophilic head, means it's attracted towards water, so it's called hydrophilic head. And another one is the hydrophobic tail. So what means of hydrophobic tail? So it's have phobia against the water, so it's not going to attract the water. So it's made up of two parts, hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail of phospholipid bilayer. The lipid bilayer is the basic structure of the plasma membrane. The bilayer is composed of two leaflets of amiphathic lipid molecules. So what means of amiphathic? Amiphathic means the structure having hydrophilic and hydrophobic both in nature. So any structure having two types like hydrophilic and hydrophobic in nature, so it's called amiphathic amipathic lipid molecular structure in the plasma membrane. Clear? What is amipathic? Now, whose polar head group are in a contact with the intra or extracellular aqueous phase. So, here you can see the head is in the contact of extracellular or intracellular. Now, the non-polar tails face each other constituting the hydrophobic interior of the membrane. So, the interior of the plasma membrane is hydrophobic in the nature, which is made up of non-polar tail of lipids. The primary physical force of organizing lipid bilayer are hydrophobic interaction. So, it's having the hydrophobic tails interaction between the plasma membrane. Now, let's move towards the structure which are embedded in the lipid bilayer. So, the lipid bilayer is made up of some phospholipid, glycolipids and sterols. So, here is the structure of phospholipid, which is the main part of the lipid bilayer. Before we see the lipid bilayer structure, which is having hydrophobic head which having hydrophobic tail and hydrophilic head. So, the one part of lipid bilayer, it's called phospholipid. Here is the structure of phospholipid. The phospholipid having hydrophilic unit, also called a polar head group, is represented by circle, whereas the hydrocarbon tail are depicted by straight lines. So, here is the hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail, the whole structure known as phospholipid. So, in the lipid bilayer, three classes of lipids molecule are present, which are that is phospholipid, glycolipid and sterols. So, what is phospholipids? Phospholipids are made up of four components: an alcohol, fatty acid, phosphate, and an alcohol attached to the phosphate. The fatty acid component are hydrophobic, whereas the remainder of the molecule are hydrophilic. There are two types of phospholipid called glycophospholipid and sphingophospholipid. So, the phospholipid made up of alcohol, fatty acid and glycerol. Clear? The phospholipid made up of alcohol, fatty acid, phosphate and glycerol. So, the phospholipid are two types: glycerophospholipid or sphingophospholipid. So, the alcohol which are attached to the phosphate, if it's a glycerol, so it's called glycerophospholipid, and if it's a spinogenol, so it's called sphingophospholipid. So, it's a phospholipid made up of four components. Now, what is glycolipid? So, glycolipids contain carbohydrate, either monosaccharides or oligosaccharides, conventionally attached to the lipid. This can derive from either glycerol or sphingosine. The simplest glycolipid, called seriproside, contain a single sugar residue, either glucose or galactose. Or gangliosides are more complex glycolipids containing branch chain of as many as 7 sugar residue. The glycolipids are found extensively in the outer leaflet of the plasma membrane, with the carbohydrate portion exposed on the cell surface. Means the outside of the cell membrane surface having glycolipid on the outer leaflet. Clear? Now, what is sterols? The basic structure of sterol is steroid nucleus consisting of 4 fused rings. So, the sterol structure having 4 fused rings, 3 with the 6 carbon and 1 with the 5 carbons. It's a planar and relatively rigid structure. Cholesterol is the major sterol present in the plasma membrane of animal cell. But in the plant cell lacks cholesterol, but they contain other sterol like stingomestrol or cystosterol, with the rare exceptions like mycoplasma. Bacterial plasma membrane also lacks cholesterol. Other is the lipid are not randomly mixed in each leaflet of bilayer. Certain lipid in the plasma membrane, particularly cholesterol or sphingolipids, are organized into aggregate, which are aggregate called lipid raffids. So, lipid raffids are a membrane microdomains that are enriched with the cholesterol and glycosphingolipids. So, clear? Lipid raffids are the enriched with cholesterol and glycosphingolipids, which are particularly in the lipid form of plasma membrane, which are not randomly mixed with each leaflet of bilayers called lipid raffids. So, it's all about the plasma membrane's lipid bilayer structure. So, you can get the idea about lipid bilayer, which having hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail, made up of phospholipid structure and another structure like glycolipid, sterols and lipid raffids. So, it's all about the lipid bilayer of the plasma membrane. So, plasma membrane, which is made up of lipid bilayer and some kind of protein. The lipid bilayer made up of 2 layers. The layer are made up of phospholipid structure, which having hydrophilic head. The hydrophilic head contain alcohol, phosphate and glycerol, while the hydrophobic tails are made up of fatty acid. So, I get you all clear about the lipid bilayer structure and phospholipid structure. Phospholipid structure, the hydrophobic tail made up of fatty acid, whereas the hydrophilic head is alcohol, phosphate and glycerol construction. So, it's all about the lipid bilayer structure. So, I hope you all clear about the lipid bilayer layer structure of plasma membrane, which is the from cell biology. Thank you so much.